So continuing on where we left off, we were discussing a young lady who is a Chicana of light skin, and that how some people confuse her with white. So she actually ended up getting a feeling of the perception of that white privilege because she was lighter skinned, because she was confused with a person of white background. She received some positive attention, but she felt it was kind of unfair that her brother was receiving negative attention. Now, a lot of Mexican students in a lot of communities, they have the saying that we didn't cross the border crossed us. Having been basically first conquered by the Spaniards who came into their country and subsequently assimilated them, taking away their language, forcing them into a religion that they didn't recognize or understand. And then years and years later, after becoming accustomed to this and creating a new identity for themselves, another country comes in and also takes them over and creates a similar situation for them, whereas they eventually ended up being foreigners on their own land. So is it acculturation or assimilation that we're talking about? Because of course, you do get a new language, but you don't necessarily forget your former language if you already spoke it, especially, or perhaps if your family passes it along to you and ensures that you speak it. You don't lose the slang that you use back home, but it could be what a lot of us typically call Spanglish, where you go from one language to the other and back and forth. Now, what she saw was acculturation as a process of adding what you have to the new situation versus the assimilation where you give up that identity and try to conform or become basically the same as those that you're trying to live with, in a sense. Basically giving up your Hispanic sense and becoming white, so to speak. Now, white students may not have the same anxiety to fit in with the population of most college campuses and even many high schools that are in an area that are worth attending are predominantly white. They get the best benefits as far as funding for those schools. So their struggle to fit in is nothing compared to the struggle of somebody of a different ethnic origin to fit in. And it kind of creates this kind of invisible tense line between the ethnic struggle and then the perceived or actual white privilege. Those that are of people of color would seem to perceive that a lot clearer than, say, your white population student. Now, racial balance of a campus would be considered something of inclusion of students, faculty, and administrators of color. Curriculum that's relevant, programs that prepare the students, not only prepare them, but also programs that have a recruitment process that's fair and equitable. That doesn't target the students based on their ethnic origin, rather than they target them for their academic achievement and accomplishment. Now, when you have a balanced program that supports all students being able to get AP classes, for instance, or college prep classes, then you have a system that has a mission that's very pluralist, where the benefit is for all rather than just for one individual group or class. Now, in the university that they were using as an example in chapter 4, there was an air of loneliness in the conversation. A lot of these students felt that they were underrepresented at the university, specifically in their ethnic or even gender groups. They also mentioned that there was what quote unquote like innocent activities that people that are not of color would consider comical, innocent, not racially charged or anything like that, but in essence, to someone that's from that background would seem very, very heavily racially charged. They were talking about border party in one of the situations where the students that wanted to attend the party had to dress up as immigrants and go through some obstacles and all kinds of different types of hazing in order to even get what they considered their green ticket or green card in order to get into the party. Now, perhaps to people that don't come from an immigrant background, that could seem perhaps amusing or comical, but for those students that lived it or had parents that lived it, it would be pretty insulting. So it creates a general climate lacking cultural awareness and understanding, or even the ability to have a sensibility towards it. This creates a situation in which students can face microaggression on and off campus. Their perspectives can be excluded and undervalued, causing frustration and isolation. They always have to prove they belong, and in the case in chapter 4, they mentioned that Chicanos and Chicanas are decreasing in numbers on campus. Now, easing the shock, as the student that was writing an essay towards the end, she said that many of them create a sense of community or counter spaces. It kind of eases the pain from the hostile climate, and it kind of allows them to endure the separation anxiety from home by joining with other students of similar circumstances. Now, a lot of these groups are either academic, such as study groups, or social. They can be both. And these study groups foster learning and nurture supportive environment. They like to use these as kind of a way of expressing themselves culturally in a situation in which they know that they're not going to be discriminated against. Although even they admit that in some of these cases, it becomes a situation of out-Chicanoing each other. Who can be more Chicano than the other? But even with the negatives involved, the idea of creating a cultural environment that you can understand and that provides some sort of support to these students is conducive to them being able to succeed in college. Now, I think those stages of passage seem a little overly simplified, and in that sense, I agree with the essay the young lady wrote. Tinto basically says that the students go from separation into a transition, and then eventually into incorporation. In other words, incorporating some of the values and traditions that they're facing or are encountering, perhaps incorporating that social mode into theirs, or even assimilating into this culture. Now, contrary to that, she believes that instead of a transition, it's more of a culture shock. So they go from that situation of culture shock into more of a community building, and then they learn how to do critical navigation within that new culture. So rather than incorporating or assimilating, they navigate through that new culture in a way where they can still retain the knowledge of where they came from and who they are, and bring these strengths into play as they interact with peoples of other cultures. Now, the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4, they discuss a lot of struggles that a lot of Chicanos and Chicana students are facing, which are not that different from struggles of other ethnic groups such as African Americans, in the sense of educational support, marginalization, in the sense of college preparation, to an extent that many of these ethnic groups find themselves unprepared when they graduate high school, and may even be forced at times to begin in a community college in order to make it. Now, we do mention pretty often in that chapter and in our discussions about ethnic groups. One thing we never consider, and although there is a certain level of white privilege, but even within each ethnic group, there's some prejudice against each other in that sense as well. Usually, it's more dealing with either their location where they live, such as a student from the city versus a student from the sticks. It's either an urban person or what they would call a hillbilly. So they could create certain prejudice and certain stereotypical names for each other that can also impact how school views the students as far as how they provide the support and preparation for obtaining a college degree. So it's not necessarily just strictly ethnic oriented, although it is primarily ethnic oriented. I hope that this presentation provided the information to get at least a perspective from my view of what the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4 were discussing. My partners are there available for any questions. Here are some of the references that I used, including the chapters from UTSA. It was my pleasure doing this presentation for you, and I hope you enjoy the activity, and have a great night.